Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in to a very special episode number 14 of One If by Land, Two If by Tea, the history comedy podcast where a real-life history teacher teaches an art school student everything he should have learned, or in this case, shouldn't learn in history class. Content warning. We're going to be talking about critical race theory today, so buckle the fuck up, I guess.
Yeah, do it.
It's going to be very interesting. It's a topic that has been in the news recently for like whether or not it should be taught, shouldn't be taught, even down to the fact of like the misconceptions of what it is, right?
That's why I'm here. That is why I'm here, because most people don't know what it is.
Yeah, it feels like so. We're just going to jump right into it. I don't have any small talk.
We don't have time for small talk.
Yeah, I don't have time for small talk. I don't really have anything to talk about here because I'm very focused on this topic. But, it feels like one of those things that people latch on to, right?
Yes.
The one that always the comparison that sticks out to me was the one that happened when we were in high school. At like high school, middle school, elementary school, right? When we were in primary school or whatever the hell education system you want to talk about at the time, understanding, gay and lesbian, and like teaching that in sexual education, even in a very progressive city that we grew up in. We grew up in the affluent suburb, because we haven't mentioned this in a while, so we'll just say this. We grew up in the affluent suburb of Boston, Newton, Massachusetts, right? It is a very, very bright beacon of progressive ideology, at least that's what they claim.
Yeah, that's what they value.
That's what they value. And so it became very important to them to like teach, gay and lesbian and transgender, understanding, I guess, because it wasn't even necessarily like, the intricacies of it during a sex ed class, but like, making sure that there were clubs and people that, were homosexual in any way, shape, or form, they could feel safe and welcomed in this school. And I remember, because specifically the part of the city that we grew up in is dominated by more conservative-leaning people, right? I'm not going to get you into the interpolitics of the city of Newton. That's a very different podcast all the way around. But, the place where I specifically grew up, and Matt grew up less than 2 miles away, was, predominantly blue-collared people. And you're talking about people that were kind of very set in their ways, because it's really tough to kind of change ideologies on the fly.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's probably the biggest thing that I understand about, like, the Black Lives Matter movement and like Me Too and like any one of these like social movements is like, look, at the very least, you have to be willing to change, but understand that changing on the fly is hard. You know what I mean? And so
we'll come back to that. Yeah.
But like changing and understanding ideology is hard on the fly, right? And so there was a lot of adversity to these type of social programs. And so now flash forward into 2021, critical race theory seems to be that hot button that, basically having openly gay like people be like, not openly gay people teaching is not something weird and new, but like understanding like having classes and clubs dedicated to the alphabet mafia, right? Which I love the term for, because it's way better than LGBTQ plus whatever, right? It's much better to just the alphabet mafia. Love it. Because the big thing was, in the argument at the time for the why not to do all of this is like, you're teaching my children to be gay.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that was the thing, is that you're actively recruiting and telling my children to be gay. And it's like, now, one, that's stupid. And two, it's like, that's not how that works.
Yeah. It's interesting that you bring that up. And I'm glad that you did, because there definitely was some pushback for things like this on the right when we were growing up.
Right.
And that's very different now.
Yeah.
Like, gay marriage, polling among Republicans,
Yeah.
it's like overwhelming, vast majority support gay marriage,
Sure.
right? And I was 24 years old, I think, when the Supreme Court upheld gay marriage.
Yes.
And I was working at a restaurant in Boston over the summer.
Very fun.
It was fun, yeah.
Yeah.
It was it's Boston Chops, great restaurant.
We went there one time.
We went there one time, yeah. And as you know, a lot of the staff there and the owner they're all in the Alphabet Mafia.
Sure.
And so I remember how much it meant to them.
Yeah.
At the time. So like I'll never forget where I was when I heard the news because I was with them and
Right.
Yeah.
Working in the entertainment industry, I have
Right.
a lot of friends that are gay, lesbian, transgender, anything on the spectrum in between, right? And so it's like, you understand that it's like, I saw a Daily Show. They have that correspondent that like goes to rallies and stuff and like sticks a microphone in people's face. Look, always comedy gold when you ask people out of context questions. Always. It's like, the Toucher and Rich show local to Boston always goes and has, people that are clearly not actual fans of the sports teams, but just went to a game and got absolutely hammered. And they interview those people and ask them like, who's your favorite player? And they name somebody that was on the team like 15 years ago. That's always fun. But they always said where he asked this lady about gay marriage specifically, and he was just like, yeah, why are you against gay marriage? And she said, because they want more. And it was just like, well, what do you mean? What do you mean more? It's like, well, the straight couple works so hard. It's like, yeah, but they just want the same. And it's just like, it just shows you how bad a political talking point can skew something one way or the other.
Yeah.
And it feels like from what I do understand about the, critical race theory, it does feel like the political talking points have overshadowed what it is, and it's overshadowed what the actual teaching is, and, basically has just turned into a finger pointing and accusation fest.
That's exactly where we're at, and that's exactly why I really wanted to do this podcast, even though we're stepping into a hornet's nest here.
Sure.
But I just feel like people don't know what it is.
Right.
So I was in a meeting with a lot of people that I like and respect, and they're intelligent, dedicated, passionate teachers. And they were talking about critical race theory and the bans and how concerned they are. And when they were talking about why they were concerned, what they were describing was not critical race theory at all.
Sure.
Like they were concerned that history would not be taught accurately. That's not what critical race theory is.
Right.
We're going to get to what it is in a moment, but it's not that.
Right.
They were concerned that accurate teaching of racism in the United States of America wouldn't be taught. And again, that's not what critical race theory is.
Right.
It's not even that, racism has shaped parts of our society, our culture, has lasting impacts. Again, I'm like, it's not that.
Right.
So I wanted to do a deep dive into what critical race theory is and what the critical race theorists believe. So let's just get the cards on the table.
Right.
Obviously, our opinions are going to come out at some point.
Sure.
Can't help it, right?
Yeah.
We're human. And this is a comedy podcast.
Yeah,
So
right.
we'll lean into that. But anyway, I had the itch to do it.
Yeah,
and
might as well.
It does fall into the category of history because essentially it's the history of higher education in this country.
Yeah.
And I actually prepped a whole nother podcast that we're actually never going to do.
Okay.
And it was on the influence of communism in American universities.
Okay.
And it's really interesting. And essentially, the gist of it, since we'll never do it, is that there was a strong communist presence in American universities from the turn of the 20th century through the 60s and 70s.
Okay.
Some of these people were card-carrying communists.
Sure.
Some of these people were communist sympathizers. And it shaped the way a lot of history was written.
Okay.
Right? I mean, you hear people talk about it now, right? That Stalin killed 40 to 60 million people.
Yes.
And our go-to for evil in the West is Hitler,
Yeah.
right?
When Stalin was way worse.
When Stalin, killed even more. Like, it should be brought up just as much, but it isn't, right? Same thing with Mao, right?
Yes.
Hitler, Stalin, Mao should all be talked about like the same thing.
Yeah.
Anytime
they're
you're
the
reaching
axis
for
of evil.
Right. There should be, if you're reaching for an evil name,
Either
all
one.
three of them should come up.
Yeah, they're synonyms.
Right. They're synonyms, but only Hitler
Yes.
seems to come up in the, modern Western consciousness. And I think that a big reason for that is the communist presence in American universities.
Sure.
But over time,
So we just did 3 episodes on the foundation of the Islamic religion, right? Those were the last 3 episodes. They're all really good. You should just check them out. They're very fun. But one of the things that I kept bringing up, and I also feel the same way when it comes to political ideology as I do with religious ideology. Communism, in theory, works, right? Or not works. Communism, in theory, is a good system, right? Everybody's equal. We all get the same stuff.
Yeah.
Hooray, hooray, right?
Right.
In practicality, it is a totalitarian government with a different name. Right? Because if you're at the top, you're benefiting from everything, and everybody else underneath you is the same, which is impoverished. I saw something that they talked about it. They talked about it on like a grading curve, where they decided to have for the next 3 tests in this college.
I saw that TikTok.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. And so they had it graded on a curve where they were just going to average everybody's score, and everybody was going to do great. And so the first one, everybody got a B because people took it seriously, took the test, and great. But then the people that were at the top of it stopped working as hard because, well, why am I going to work as hard if the people at the bottom are still going to, benefit from my hard work? And so over the course of the 3 tests, by the time we got to the end, they were failing because everybody stopped working. You know what I mean? And so it's like, that's the practicality of this. Right. Now, the flip side is that people don't, in this country, specifically in the United States, don't want to actually take a critical look at the capitalist system.
Yes.
And how that's affecting people because
Yes.
it's like, well, this other one is so bad, so we have to be the best. And,
Right.
And it's like, well, that's not true either.
Exactly. It's a great comparison because it's so touchy.
Yeah.
It's so touchy and lacks nuance in
Yes.
a lot of our discourses.
Nobody, and I blame Twitter. Twitter is the big one that I don't understand, right? So I will bring this into a conversation I had with wrestling Twitter, right? Which has to be the most innocuous of the Twitters. It is a niche, like, fad, or not even fad, a niche, like, hobby that people enjoy, right? There is a wrestler by the name of Sasha Banks. Local Bostonian person, by the way.
Oh.
Yeah, she's from Boston. Her Snoop Dogg's cousin. Lovely person. Anyway, point is that her section of the fan base believes she is infallible in every single way. She played a featured extra role, right? Maybe it was something a little bit better, but that's basically what it is. It's a prominently featured extra in a movie, right? Somebody that recurs doesn't really have any lines, but comes up more often in the show or the movie. So she was in the 2nd season of The Mandalorian. There were some people that were telling me online that the reason why The Mandalorian was a successful Emmy-winning television program was because of her. And so when I say that is definitely not the case, the nuance is thrown out the window and people don't even want to have a discussion.
You just think she's a terrible person.
I think that she's a terrible person. I think that she shouldn't have a job. And it was just like, I didn't say that. That is not a thing I said. You know what I mean? And so I blame Twitter because you only have 60 characters or 160 characters to get your point across. And that means that you have to remove the nuance. So we as an entire society have taken that Twitter mentality and have applied it to everything else.
Yeah, I think Twitter accelerated this all or nothing thinking for sure. But so talking about the trend of communist sympathizers in universities, by the time you get to the 60s and 70s, it's kind of hard to keep defending communism.
Sure.
Right? Because at this point, we know more of what Stalin did. We know what Mao did. Right? It's just becoming.
They took away the blue jeans.
It took away the blue jeans and the legs that were in them.
Yeah.
Maybe. So the professors are less and less likely to say that they're a communist, but they're latching on to ideologies that are similar, sort of next generation, we'll call it for our purposes.
Right.
Extensions of some of the ideas of Marxism, without the same political system attached to it, if that makes sense. Right. So still targeting power and how it works, right? And oppression. These are major themes in all these. Most of them are called like critical theories.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Critical race theory is just one of those.
Correct.
There's gender studies. There's post-colonial theory, disability studies, fat studies. All of them fall into this like critical theory family.
Right. Okay.
And they're all part of this other philosophy family called postmodernism.
Okay, I've heard of that.
Which should be a whole nother podcast, but we just can't.
Yeah,
we just can't. So, in a nutshell, postmodernism, all knowledge is just Legos.
Okay.
You can stack it all up. You can rearrange it. Everything is built off of something else.
Yeah.
There's no objective truth.
Okay.
There's no objective good or objective bad. Everything's relative.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. Which that right there, like you could sort of say sometimes.
Yeah, sure.
And sometimes no.
Yeah.
Right. Like there are certain measurable things that we do know that are objective. And then there's other things. It's always going to be a subjective interpretation.
Yes. It's crazy because we live in a world where now history unfolds and is documented in real time, right? I talk about it with our political leaders, and I throw that in the airest of air quotes. But there are countless times where a senator, a congressman, a mayor, a governor, they will say something that is like impactful, right? You know, they're dealing with a crisis or a hot button issue of some kind, and they will say something that contradicts a statement that they made a couple years prior. And they will say when pressed on that, I never said that. But then there's video evidence of them saying the contradictory statement, right? And before then, you know, like, yeah, we know what happened in World War II, but World War II also, for the most part, is still written by the victors.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, and the further back you go, the more that lens of what happened is written by the person that won.
Right.
You know, and so it's very interesting because history gets less objective or less subjective the closer to modern times that you get.
Right. And then until you get too close.
And
then you don't know the full extent of like a president, the actions that they took. You don't know exactly what those results are going to be for another 10 years.
Correct.
Yeah. So, good. Okay, so we covered postmodernism in 30 seconds because we have to.
Yes.
Liberalism.
Okay.
So, Americans hear that word and they think tax and spend, Democrat, right?
Yes.
But the traditional meaning of the word is individual rights, freedoms, equality, civil liberties, free enterprise. People that celebrate those things.
Correct.
So, America as a nation is built on the idea of liberalism.
Yes.
So, again, if you hear that word from now through the end of the podcast, we are talking about traditional liberalism. We are not talking about FDR.
Yeah.
We are not talking about tax and spend Democrats.
Sure.
We're talking about that traditional meaning of the word. So a lot of the what is critical race theory research is coming from James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose and their book Cynical Theories, which covers in great detail, like, what do these people believe?
Sure.
What are they saying? I was sort of surprised when I read the book because I had heard him speak and I knew what his opinion was going in.
Okay.
But it's a very cold, sober, here's what it is. Here's, quotes. A lot of the quotes I'm going to read are not from James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose. They're from the critical theorists themselves.
Okay.
So, essentially, it's a great place to go to just get an idea of, like, what do these people believe in? The
Sure.
most influential of them. And so they actually got famous. Did you hear about the fake academic paper scandal?
No.
So James Lindsay, Helen Pluckrose, and another professor, I think they're all in math. They were in mathematics, at least James Lindsay was. They were sort of, unhappy with some of the things going on at their university with some of these theories, some of the, like, gender studies, fat studies, critical race theory, all of that, from a scholarship perspective.
Okay.
That that they weren't doing rigorous enough scholarship. So they wrote fake academic papers.
Okay.
Faked everything. Like the research,
Sources.
everything was fake. And they submitted them. And a bunch of them got published in these journals.
Okay.
Not only that, they got, like, recognition for outstanding scholarship. One of them was up for an award.
Okay.
And all of it was fake.
Okay.
And so they did it to prove the point of, like, the scholarship, like the
Right.
rigorousness of the scholarship. So that's what he's known for. But again, I'm going to get into what critical race theory is, and I'm going to read some quotes from the book, most of which are not them, just the critical race theorists, and that's where I found them.
Okay.
So anyway, history of it, it is an offshoot from those theories, like I said, and from legal studies in the late 1960s and early 1970s. And to jump in a little bit to, the study of race and racism in the country, right?
Okay.
Because that's what it's targeting. So critical race theorists, like scientists and like pretty much everybody rational today,
Right.
believe that race is a social construct,
Yes.
right? Which
Yeah.
we know it is.
Yes.
Right?
100%.
You could, if you're in, Brazil, you could be one race.
Right.
You come to America, you're a different race.
Yes.
Like, and nothing about you changed.
Correct.
It's as skin deep as it gets, right? And people like W.E.B. Du Bois made that argument. Yeah. Pioneered that argument at the turn of the century, right? And they used it to fight the pseudoscience that had been used on them to justify racism.
Right, because part of the thing that they were saying in, pre the 1970s was that, like, the black man, quote unquote, is inferior to the white man.
Yeah.
Like, that was, and it was like this scientific
Right.
thing that they were touting.
Right.
When, if you've watched the NBA, you know that's not true.
The differences that we know of, right, are, like, they're so small in things that really matter.
Right.
Right.
But it's also the things that are small and different about a white person to a black person are the same things that you would find as, like, the difference between a black bear and a polar bear. Right? Like, if I was to flip-flop each one into their climate, they both would suffer and die because they have developed, like, it's Darwinism, right? They've developed certain pigments and, defense mechanisms that make them suitable for the environment that they are in. If I am in the sweltering heat of Africa, I need to be more protected by the sun than if I'm in Norway.
Exactly. And, like, that's pretty much the extent of it. And what's interesting is that, we were just saying how racial identification is such an evolving concept that, like, the Bible makes almost no reference to skin color,
Yeah.
which is fascinating because they were very different looking people
Yes.
that you would have encountered traveling across those areas. There were people from Africa,
Right.
and Asia, and
Well, as
what
we
we
found
call
in
Middle
our
East.
Islam 3-part extravaganza, Mecca was a tourist destination.
Right.
It was that day's Disney World.
yeah. Well, and you know the term Black Irish, right?
Yes.
Which literally is just like dark hair
Yes.
and maybe a little tan.
Yeah.
You know, we could go on and on with the different identifications across the world. The color-based racism that critical race theory targets comes from the colonial period in the New World, right? So from 1492 onward, right? And this is different from other forms of tribalism because it is so heavily based on race,
Yeah.
right? And it is hereditary. And the fact that it's used as a justification for mistreatment is not new, right?
Right.
Because people do that to the tribe
Yep.
across the way. They're different from us.
Yeah.
When they
They believe in the wind god, not the sun god.
Exactly. But what's different about this racism is that it's based on this like pseudoscience.
Yeah, right.
That's the constant fight. This is partly why post-colonial theory somewhat has a beef with science.
Okay.
Is because it has been used in the past
Right.
as a tool for racism. There's other reasons why.
Yeah, I
they're
mean
somewhat
that's part of why,
anti-science.
and like they've talked about it, that the African American community doesn't really trust the government with the vaccines.
Yeah.
Because in the past they've experimented on the African American community with vaccines.
Right. That's a real thing that happened, you know? And so continuing on, right? So, as we know, right, in the United States of America, because this movement, critical race theory, is an American movement,
Yes.
right? So we've had a lot of changes with race relations in this country, right? When it's founded, slavery was legal, right?
Yes.
And we had a civil war, abolition, right? But then there was Jim Crow,
Right.
And civil rights movement that, 80 years
Yeah. Right.
got laws changed, right? Rights enshrined, but we know racism still exists in this country.
Yes.
All right. So, yeah,
There are still sundown towns.
there are still, for those of you who don't know, that's a term that means if you are black and you are out after sundown
In this town.
in a sundown town, you could be arrested or stopped by the police.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are towns. where
Not you can, you will.
Right, you will. So, right, all that laid out on the table. So, critical race theorists claim that this is what they're trying to fix.
Sure.
Right? This is the idea. And there's a heavy focus on the law and a revolutionary change to the way the laws are written. There's two schools of critical race theory. There's linguistic and materialist schools.
Okay.
So I'll read a short quote. This one is from James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose, but it's literally just defining the two schools. As their designation implies, materialist race critics theorize about how material systems, economic, legal, political, affect racial minorities. Postmodern theorists, by contrast, were more concerned with linguistic and social systems and therefore aimed to deconstruct discourses, detect implicit biases, and counter underlying racial assumptions and attitudes.
Okay.
So, those are the two schools there, right?
Yep.
So, one group of critical race theorists is analyzing economics, the legal system, politics. The other is the human-to-human interactions, right? The theory is that the way that we speak, our implicit biases, our implicit assumptions reinforce racism.
Okay.
All right, so, and I really wanted to do this because, like, people don't know that, right? That
Right.
there's two schools and
Right.
it's
Yeah,
complicated.
you think it's one thing. And
Right.
Again, well, so I guess my big thesis when it comes to this whole thing is that something like this, right? Like the idea of critical race theory ultimately stems from a social media need to be first, right? It's first and virtue signaling are the two that I believe, right? Again, I brought up earlier that we are from the affluent suburb of Boston, Newton, Massachusetts. And there is not a lot of diversity in the city of Newton, Massachusetts. And I kind of put these in the same sort of camp where you need to put a sign in your yard for Black Lives Matter when you're just making yourself feel good. Like you're not actually doing anything with that sign that is in your yard with your white neighbors in your affluent bubble, right? Like you're not actually doing anything by putting that sign there. But what you were doing is showing to everybody else that I care, that you care, that I care. I care. Look at me. I'm helping and I care, right? And so it feels like with something like this, with critical race theory in general, it's I want to quote unquote be on the right side of history, and I'm going to latch on to this thing that I might not necessarily fully understand because I need to show the rest of the world via my online internet presence that I care.
That's definitely how I feel. I have some thoughts on those signs in a town like Newton that I'll just hold because you said you'd fire me if I offended anybody. So
Yeah. Well,
I don't want to get fired.
Here's the thing. I said it without saying it.
All right. So I'm going to go to a short excerpt from a book called Critical Race Theory.
Ooh.
Yeah. Self-titled. Richard Delgado and Gene Stefancic. I think I'm saying that right. It's spelled in a similar way to Stipe Miocic.
Okay.
So I'm just assuming it's pronounced the same way.
Good enough for me.
Yeah. So, unlike traditional civil rights discourse, which stresses incrementalism and step-by-step progress, critical race theory questions the very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, Enlightenment rationalism, and neutral principles of constitutional law.
Okay.
So that's a really important statement
Yeah.
to break down because we opened the podcast, you were talking about how difficult it is to get massive changes right away.
Right.
And the history of our civil rights movement, right, which they say they question
Yes.
in that very sentence, right, was step-by-step progress, incremental progress. You could argue in the 1960s that there were 2 points where there was radical change overnight, right?
Yeah.
Like the Civil War
Yes.
and then, the civil rights movement.
Right.
But even
No more
there-
slaves, no more segregation.
Right. But even there, it was still sort of a step-by-step process to get people to act right.
Yes.
So, in their own words, right, they question whether that's progress, whether that's good, whether that's positive. They question whether we can have equality,
Right.
whether we can have neutral principles of constitutional law, which is, the way that our country operates.
Right.
And I'm going to continue another excerpt from their book. Critical race scholars are discontented with liberalism as a framework for addressing America's racial problems. Many liberals believe in color blindness and neutral principles of constitutional law. They believe in equality, especially equal treatment for all persons regardless of their different histories or current situations.
Okay.
So, and again, Liberal does not
Yes.
mean tax and spend Democrat. It's
Right.
life, liberty, pursuit of happiness.
Right.
All men are created
Because
equal.
that statement in and of itself makes a ton of sense. All the laws apply to all the people all the time.
So no, they don't believe that.
Oh, they don't believe
They
that.
don't
Okay.
believe that.
Okay.
Yeah, they don't
Yes.
believe in neutral law.
Okay. Oh,
So there's,
okay.
There's no such thing.
There's no such thing as neutral law.
Yes.
Okay, I got it.
Right. So yeah, all of that is.
Yeah.
We should really make that clear. I know
Yes.
I'm reading it. I have it right in front of me.
Sure.
But those
Sure.
are all things that they don't agree with. Neutral principles of constitutional law, equal treatment for all people, regardless of their histories. Right. So that means you don't treat everyone equally.
Yeah.
You treat people differently based on their history.
Right.
So.
And we saw that. We definitely saw that over the last couple of years. Right, and we see that we do see that in the justice system, for at some points, right? People believe that Derek Chauvin should not have gone to jail because the person that he murdered had a drug problem and was arrested before.
Did people?
Yeah,
I didn't find anybody that wasn't like that guy needs to hang for what he did.
Oh, there were
The
people.
arguments I heard was for how long?
Oh no, I heard, and again, I do live in a different online space. But there were a lot of people that, were like, hey, that guy, was a drug addict, so he shouldn't. He was just doing his job, so he was, back the blue.
I'm gonna go to another prominent critical race theorist in the 1970s. His book Race, Racism, and American Law is in the canon.
Okay.
In the canon of critical race theory.
Sure. Sure.
And the thesis of the book is that whites have allowed rights to blacks only when it was in their interest to do so.
Okay.
So there was no progress. It was only another form of oppression.
Okay.
And the quote, progress in American race relations is largely a mirage, obscuring the fact that whites continue, consciously or unconsciously, to do all in their power to ensure their dominion and maintain their control. So
Okay.
his argument is, for example, the civil rights movement,
Sure.
that the rights, freedoms, legal changes, while most of us, am I allowed to say those were positives
Yes.
and they were a step forward, right? So that's my opinion, people.
Yeah. Right.
Civil rights movement was good.
The hot take, bro.
Martin Luther King
Yeah.
Jr.,
Hot
hero.
Take. Hot take.
He deserves his holiday and
Yeah.
all the statues,
Yeah, and the streets.
the streets, all of it, right? So Bell is against that.
Yeah. Okay.
So what he says is that was actually a self-serving move from white supremacy to shut down the more radical wings of the Black Power movement, Black Panthers, and so on.
Okay.
So again,
Yeah.
we're
So-
going through we're not gonna
Yeah.
we're not gonna stop, I guess, and editorialize everything because
Right.
it'll be a 5-hour podcast.
Sure.
We have to get
We
through
just got-
what is this thing.
Yeah,
So,
right.
To be clear,
Yeah. So far this quote is basically just saying, like, the only reason the civil rights movement happened and we desegregated stuff was because actually white supremacy needed to maintain their power.
yes. Which, one day I'm gonna pitch this on air, and
Okay.
we'll see what the listeners think. I would love for us to watch an episode of Eyes on the Prize, which is a fantastic civil rights documentary.
Okay.
With a lot of raw footage.
Yeah.
And it is amazing the things people would say on camera in the 50s and 60s.
Okay.
And also in the 80s when some of them were old.
Okay.
Talking. It's just astounding what comes out of people's mouths.
Yeah.
But I can't look at what these people are saying and say like, oh, they're playing 3-dimensional chess.
Yeah.
And just giving these people the
Well-
right to attend their they fought tooth and nail. We had to send in the army
Yeah.
to get them to act.
Well,
right.
that's the thing is that you can't tell me that they gave in, gave the rights, but then at the same time hosed and sent dogs on people.
Yeah.
Right? Like you can't, like you would just keep doing that.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like that's the thing you would just keep doing.
Right.
And not because the idea of supremacy, right, in every way, shape, or form is I am superior in every way, shape, or form.
Yes.
And so by conceding even a little bit undercuts the ideology that I am superior to you in every way, right? And that's a tough pill to swallow when there are actively the name escapes me at the time, right? Like at the time, right now it escapes me and I can't remember. Maybe you'll remember when I actually say what it is and stop vamping. But in the NFL, there is a rule that you have to interview
Rooney Rule.
The Rooney Rule. Multiple minority candidates when having a head coaching vacancy, right? That is a rule in the NFL. If you're telling me that the civil rights movement was just a guise, things like the Rooney Rule would not exist.
Yeah.
Things like affirmative action would not exist. Now, am I saying those systems are perfect?
No.
No, not by any stretch. But I am saying they would not exist if you were just giving a dog a bone.
Yeah, exactly. And then the most obvious counterpoint to Mr. Bell, who obviously is not here to defend himself.
Sure.
So, but respectfully, the Civil War, there was nothing to be gained for all of those hundreds of thousands of men that died fighting to free slaves. And there's an argument that they weren't fighting to free the slaves. The problem is they sang so many songs about freeing the slaves.
Well, the thing is that you can undercut the Civil War was not about slaves argument because it's really stupid, right? So you're saying that it was economical, right? Like that's the argument, right?
Yeah.
The argument is that the South was rebelling because of tariffs placed on the South because they were exporting cotton elsewhere.
Yeah.
Right? I want to say like Egypt and France or something, but they were getting taxed on that. And so the North was putting those tariffs on them and they got mad about that. And the thing is that they said that it was cutting into their profits. And it's like, well, guys, you're not paying your labor force. Yeah. So what are you talking about? Like at no point in any one of their arguments that counters against slavery, it all links back to it.
Yeah.
Because when your economical system is based on this is where like actual systemic racism is like really a thing because your entire economy is based on the fact that you don't have to pay for workers.
Yeah, that is a literal system of racism.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the term.
Yeah.
You know, it's so that's our feeling on Bell's thoughts. We disagree respectfully. That basically the progress that we've seen is a mirage. Yeah. That's a core tenet of critical race theory. The materialists are sort of dominant in the 70s and 80s. And then it switches to a more postmodern linguistic variety later on. And so I'm going to read a quote on that. This one's from James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose. Over time, the postmodernists came to focus on microaggressions, hate speech, safe spaces, cultural appropriation, and implicit association tests, media representation, quote, whiteness, unquote, and all the now familiar trappings of current racial discourse. So, I include that just like this is where this comes from.
Right.
This study in universities over time. So it's actually not new.
Right.
It's just newly becoming popular and
well, and again,
mainstream.
it comes from this is a exact cause and effect of social media and the marches that we saw in 2020, right? In reality, the conversations that we still need to be having are around prison and police reform. Like, that's really the issue that we need to be talking about right now, right? And things haven't really changed. Like in the state of Massachusetts, right? I don't know if they're open today. I don't go. But there is a weed store, like an actual weed store where I can purchase marijuana at any point, Monday through Friday. I'm assuming 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. I'm going to say that I can go and purchase weed, right?
Yep.
And there are people currently sitting in prison for selling marijuana.
Yeah.
And that type of stuff needs to be addressed.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And if you're saying that that is an issue that we have to talk about that has a racial component to it, I will hear you on that.
Of course.
Right? Because, again, why does the weed shop in Newton not have a problem? But there's some kid from Mattapan that was selling weed to make money, you know, because not everybody is Tony Montana. I'm sorry. Like,
Right.
not everybody is some sort of just like crazy, you know, drug kingpin that's murdering people and putting them in oil drums. That's just not the fact, right? And so if you want to talk about that, I'll hear you. But to then go and be like, yes, but also if you sing along to a rap song in the car, you're racist.
That the cultural appropriation.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't understand the argument on that simply because all of our food is cultural appropriation.
Oh, everything.
All of it.
Everything.
All the food, most of the music,
Yes.
Brazilian jiu-jitsu
Oh, yeah. Yes.
is it originated as cultural appropriation under the strictest of terms, right? It was
Right.
brought over from the Japanese, and
Yep.
they took it. The Gracies evolved their own
Yeah.
thing, and now it's become popular in America,
Right.
and worldwide, right? And so I don't understand the argument that that's negative.
Well, that's the craziest part is that I don't know when it shifted from the idea of the melting pot, right? Because back in, you know, the 20s,
Yeah,
like the idea was that it was the melting pot.
yeah, we celebrated that.
We celebrated
Yeah.
the fact there's a Brad Paisley song, right? And I forget the name of it, but the whole thing is it's like an American Saturday Night or something like that. But he like breaks down like I went to the fair and I got like this Italian dish when I wore this French hat and like, you know, like broke down all of these things, how like the American experience is a hodgepodge. It's a casserole, right? Like that's what it's been this whole time.
Yeah.
If you want French culture, you go to France.
Yes.
That is where, but there are elements of French culture here. You know what I mean? But it's not dominated.
Yes. Yeah. So the critical race theorists argue that cultural appropriation is a negative thing. You know, I don't understand that, but this is the What is Critical Race Theory
Right.
podcast. So we're explaining what it is. And another core idea is standpoint theory, which is the idea that one's identity and position in society influence how you see and understand the world.
Sure.
So that, to a certain extent, is obvious, right?
Yeah.
Like we all have, we walk in our shoes, and our identity and our experiences shape us,
Right.
right? So definitely no beefs with that.
Sure. Yeah.
And I'm going to read a quote from another theorist, Patricia Williams, in The Alchemy of Race and Rights. And the intersection of race, gender, and class casts the law as a mythological text in which the powers of commerce and the Constitution, wealth and poverty, sanity and insanity wage war across complex and overlapping boundaries of discourse. and deliberately transgressing such boundaries, pursue a path toward racial justice that is ultimately transformative.
Okay.
So that part's a little bit confusing, but the reason why I highlighted it is the fact of the law as a mythological text.
Yeah. Well, I do feel like we as a American society, and it's something that we definitely need to change, is this idea that like the Constitution, like, and I don't know when it happened because somebody in the education system failed, but the idea that the Constitution is all-knowing, all-seeing, and that is what we should be. Not taking into account that the word amendment means change. You know what I mean? Like the idea that it's intended as a living, breathing document.
Yes.
And at one point was pitched to be ripped up and rewritten every like 25 years or something like that.
What?
So like I this also might not be based in any truth, but like the idea of that, like we should rewrite the Constitution regularly.
Oh, that's a meme that's gone around where Thomas
Sure.
Jefferson said,
Yeah.
and I don't think there's any evidence.
I don't
about
think
that.
there's any evidence
Yeah.
to it, but it's one of those things that it's like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Maybe not 25 years because that sample size, but like once every couple of generations, the pulse of the nation is changed in such a way that, yeah, maybe it does need some like radical overhauling.
It has been.
Yo, yeah.
It has been. I mean, we didn't directly elect senators
Yes.
in
Right.
this country. You could not vote for the senator.
Yes.
Insane.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, there have been giant fundamental changes to the way this nation is governed.
Acknowledging that people exist at one point is a pretty big one.
Yeah.
But like the idea of like having more sweeping changes to it that can affect, I guess, would be a positive thing.
So the positionality thing is that, and that the Constitution is a myth, is that everything operates based on who you are and where you are in society.
Right.
So, and we'll get to this a little bit more with intersectionality. I don't think I actually understand the difference between the two things, positionality and intersectionality. So I'll put that out there for the listeners, but
Sure.
trying my best. The idea is that you have multiple identities, multiple selves,
Yep.
that you are white, male,
Okay.
your class, maybe even your age,
Sure.
able-bodied or not,
Okay.
perceived as fat or not,
Right.
all of these things, right? And there's a matrix of oppression.
Yeah.
I think that's an actual quote. We might get to that later. I
Okay.
might have got ahead of myself. But
Maybe.
essentially that your overarching identity is, could be like graft,
Yes.
essentially, on these
Right.
lines, right? Where if you were everything you are now of all those, like, religion, all that, but like we change your race, that moves you to a different point on the graft.
So now this to me feels like the movie Minority Report.
How so?
So do you remember the movie Minority Report?
I love that movie. I saw it a million times.
Okay, so the idea is, for those of you who don't know, is a Tom Cruise-led sci-fi vehicle, and it's a wonderful movie, where in the future, Tom Cruise is a police officer, and they are basically conducting police work based off of these three people that like sit in this like tub gel thing. Because what they do is they predict the future. So they predict all crime based off of what's going to happen in the future. So they arrest these people based on what they're going to do, not what they've already done. So like if they're going to murder somebody, it's going to be because they're going to, not because they did. And so this graph and chart and matrix makes it feel like you're basically assigning like I'm racist points to people based off of like a chart,
Yeah.
and not taking into account any sort of actual life experiences.
Yes, I would say that interpretation is correct as I understand it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. It's more about like the oppression you will experience than the racism you will do.
Okay.
Is the way that
Yeah,
graph
sure.
is meant. No, so yeah,
I
what
almo-
you will receive versus what you will do.
Right. This is also another thing that always kind of like, I don't want to say upset me because that's not necessarily the right word, but I always looked at when we've talked about religion, right? Like, and the idea specifically of like murdering somebody for a religion, right? You don't believe in the same thing that I do, so therefore you got to die.
Yeah.
Right? And I've always talked about this where it's like, all right, born in the United States and I'm raised to believe in Roman Catholicism. That was never my choice, right? Like at no point early on in the religious process was I sat down and been like, these are your options.
No, you just don't remember it
Yeah.
because you were 6 months old.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
They explained it to you before they
they
christened
do.
you. Yeah,
They
they
do.
do.
They do.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It's
They
all-
don't show that part.
There's a whole quiz.
Yeah.
There's a whole quiz. You know what I mean? And so it's like the idea, and this is taking that, like, you know, let's just say the Islamic God is right. It's like, well, that's a pretty dick move if you're allowing other religions to exist. I believe in this stuff, but have never been exposed to what is actually correct. How is that my fault when I like try to get into whatever version of heaven or the afterlife you believe in? So like to flip it on its head, I am Hindu.
Yes.
Right? I am in India, I am Hindu, and I believe in reincarnation and I believe in all of that beautiful stuff. But the Roman Catholicism, or one of the Christian religions, is the accurate one. So I die, and now I get up to the pearly gates of heaven. I see St. Peter, right? It's Peter? Is he the...
Yes.
Okay, so I get up to Peter and I go, hey, what's the deal, man? And he's like, you were a Hindu, so now you need to be tortured for...
Okay, we got to come back to this.
Yeah.
We got to come back because this idea is going to come up later.
Right.
Yeah.
And it feels like it fits in with the critical race theory.
It does.
Because, like, that's the problem. It's just like, again, I understand. I can sit here at this table in front of this microphone and acknowledge that it's like, yes, I grew up in the affluent city suburb of Boston. It doesn't get much whiter than that. Like, I understand that. And I touched on it earlier. With the people with the signs in their yard.
Yeah.
It was by design, right? Like, I understand that, and I understand why that might be a problem,
Yeah.
right? But that can't, like, you're no better than anybody that is actually racist if you were to hold that against me just by looking at those statistics.
We're going to come back to all that. That's all going to come up later.
Well, here's the thing. We're going to make a decision on the fly. We're rearing up to an hour.
Yeah. Oh,
right
yeah.
now.
Remember when you were worried?
I was worried.
You were worried.
I was worried. But here I am. So we can do one of two things. We can push through, have it be a longer episode, or we can break it up and come back to it and have it be a two-parter.
How badly have I offended everybody?
Oh, not bad at all.
Not bad at all.
I'm pretty sure I just said the worst thing possible.
Okay. I do want to we'll have to come back to that idea of our responsibilities,
Right.
right? As people in society, right? So
Yeah.
you brought that up with religion, which places a pretty heavy burden on non-believers.
Right.
But obviously there are people who could be non-believers through no fault of their own.
Correct.
They were never even exposed to the idea.
Yeah, right.
And we're going to pick up on that next week.
All right, we're going to pick it up on that in part 2 of our discussion on critical race theory. Thank you for tuning in. I'm going to make this intro very quick because I'm basically just going to stop and start again. So
Yeah,
that,
we are.
so
Yeah, this session is going to continue.
so we're going to continue. So thank you very much. Like, comment, subscribe. Email, tweet, all that fun stuff. You can find me at the Eddie McCabe on all social media platforms.
MR Clark 135 on everything.
All right, and we'll see you real soon.
Real soon.